hundreds of hours, even if the game is still in early access. And that's what people like about the game, and that's what people actually told us in the Steam forums and all. They were like, okay, this game is in early access. I don't really like early access games in general, but this game is so generous in terms of content, in terms of gameplay, in terms of strategies that that I like it, and that's what we are happy about with the game, because the game may seem indie and may seem like this small game, but it's actually really ambitious in terms of content, because players can actually spend hundreds of hours and still find something new every time they play. So yeah, that actually worked for us. And yeah, I think that it helped us differentiate ourselves to other games who had like maybe a small demo that players could finish in 20 or 30 minutes. Maybe those demos didn't really make the players ask for more, or maybe didn't really make the players say, okay, I'll remember that game. I don't know.
You know, what I would want to say in terms of just an opinion for me, I wouldn't agree with you saying that it was ambitious. I would say more along the lines of you guys just provided a ton of value and kind of like over delivered on the promise that you might have sold in terms of like images and other assets and stuff. So but I mean, I know the project as a whole was ambitious too, but that's the word I would say. I would say you guys just value packed that thing like crazy to the point where people got into it, regardless of who the player was, whether it's like an influencer or anybody. And then they're like, wow, which is clearly the reaction you guys were getting. So that would be my point. I think that my takeaway from that is just anything you can do to really value pack that, and how you do that is going to different, game to game, of course. But I really liked that. That's like what was a key important thing that you guys honed in and focused on, because clearly it paid off too.
Yeah, I mean, what I want people to keep in mind is that this strategy actually worked for us because we have this game, but maybe for other games it will be different. So that's what I want. I don't want people to say, okay, I'll do like the last spell and have some success, because there's always the survivor's bias, saying, okay, I'll do the exact same thing as them and it will work. No, because each game is different. You don't necessarily have the same target audience. You don't necessarily have your players don't really behave the same way as they do with us with last spell. You probably have a different game, and players are not looking for the same thing in terms of expectations.
No, very, very good point. Because again, sometimes everybody likes to take the path that someone else took to success and mirror it completely, and unfortunately, it just doesn't work that way. Before we move on to lessons learned, because I think there's a lot that we can get out of that too. There's one particular thing I thought was kind of interesting about your messaging, and I'm speaking wholly with regards to messaging. So everything from your short description to your screenshots that you shared and promoted, they're relatively simple and concise. So I was just curious if you could elaborate a little bit more about how you feel about this approach, and how you feel it perhaps helped you with your goals and objectives.
That's very interesting, because when we released our last game, which was Dead in Vinland, it was a very hard game to market. I mean, I loved working on it, but when you described the game, it was like, okay, it's a survival management game. You have this group of people, and there's also combat, but you have to manage their rations, their food, and you have to make some buildings in the game, and it's hard to explain to players. And I think that's what we've been learning with this series, is that players don't really when players see a new game, they want to understand the game quickly. They
Mm.
don't really have time to spend several minutes reading the many features of your game, and they will probably won't will not even look at your gameplay trailers with that last 3 minutes. No, when they found your Steam page, you need to say, all right, those players don't really have time. They will spend maybe, I don't know, maybe 1 minute top on your Steam page. So in 1 minute, you need to explain to them what kind of game it is and why it's a game for them. And for the last spell, I feel that we were very lucky because the last spell is a very simple game to explain to people. It's like, okay, you take a tactical RPG, but you have a small group of people and you fight hordes of monsters, and it's a roguelite. Basically, in 10 seconds, you can explain the game. And when people think about that, it's very easy for them to picture the game. Then you put some one or two screenshots about the game, about the UI, the combat, and then they will probably say, okay, this is like Final Fantasy Tactics, but you fight hordes of enemies. Or they will like, okay, this is a bit like There Are Billions, for example, which is one of our references. So I'm going to like it. And what we realize is that people like to understand the game quickly because it will be easier for them to actually like the game. And yeah, this is why I think that was very great for the last spell. It's a very simple but strong concept to explain, and it was very simple for players to actually understand the concept. So yeah, this is why on in the messaging we focused on the big concept, and then of course we once players were on the Steam page in the description, we said, okay, this is a roguelite, so you will unlock weapons, then you will build some buildings, and you have a city to protect. But when they are reading that, it means that they are interested about the game. So to me the hardest thing is done.
Yeah. Like and thank you for going into further detail on that and everything, because uh this is something I think I've even mentioned a few episodes ago about the importance of messaging and being concise and being simple. Because as you said it, like players don't have a whole lot of time and they want to be
Yeah,
quickly aware of, is this something I'm going to like or not? Because let's face it, we're all busy.
yeah, absolutely.
As much as we like browsing through our Steam pages or whatever else we're browsing through, the reality is we're all busy. We're all trying to be distracted. Whatever the case may be. So making it quick and simple is definitely good. And obviously you're right. There's going to be cases where some games are going to have more of a challenge than others in
Yeah,
terms
yes.
of explaining that, but still the focal point should be making it concise. And again, even in your article too, you mentioned how, like, hey, this is how we presented our screenshots, and we made sure that it provided as much information as possible. So now when you couple the two, like they could read the description, they could see the image and go, boom, I know exactly what I'm getting. And I determined this within, like, 10, 20 seconds. That's what you need to
And
do.
this Yeah, and this is why I'm saying it again, because I want really people to keep it in mind is that you need to understand your target audience. I mean, you need to understand why your players should actually like your game, and this will help you so much when you work on the messaging of the game.
Awesome. So thank you for reemphasizing that point, because you're right. It's very, very imperative. And sometimes when you get lost in the details and the development and everything else, it can be easy to forget, but it's important not to. All right. Well, let's move on. As we kind of wrap up here, I want to go over some lessons learned. Now,
Yeah.
I was just curious. I mean, you guys had. I know that you weren't with the team as long as the Ishtar Games has been around for, but based off of the other games that you have been a part of, and over that time of game, like, did you ever feel that those previous releases helped with the last spell?
Um, I'd say that it depends. It depends because in terms of players and community, not really because the spell is not does not really have the same target audience as Dead in Vinland, for example. And Dead in Vinland was still a kind of niche game. Some people knew about us, but it was not the majority. On the other hand, in terms of lessons learned and marketing, yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that every single person who works in marketing in games in general will tell you that you learn something new every day, and that's true because you make some you will always make some mistakes, and this is normal. You need to learn about them. And when we released Dead in Vinland, we learned a lot of things. We learned how to manage, for example, how to manage the players, how to say, okay, players actually complaining about something, what to do about that. And you also learn some technical things in terms of Steam branches and all. But yeah, I mean, you learn something new. So the important thing is that even if you fail something, even if something doesn't work out, you we always under, we always try to figure out why it didn't work out and how we could do better next time.
So I love how, of course, you outline some of the processes, like how to deal with players and things like that in communities.
Yeah,
So it's like you can learn a lot from the processes of things, but I love
yeah,
how you defined your response first with, but it still is dictated by the audience. So,
yeah,
because even as a company with multiple titles, it doesn't mean that okay, we can just wash the last one and now repeat everything. No, again, like you said, it's defined by the audience. However, the processes might make it a little bit more streamlined.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, we wish we could just have the same audience and just growing it from game to game, but unless you have the exact same type of game, then but if you have another type of game, then you need to pretend that it's a whole new target audience, and maybe some of your older players will play your new game, which is great, but you need to understand that the the your potential players are pretty much infinite. There are billions of players in the world, and you need to focus on them. You can't really focus on your old players.
Yeah, definitely. Another thing I was curious about too is during the development of the last spell, you always had some type of marketing efforts for the most part, but during that two year or so period, did you ever feel that you had any missed opportunities? And if so, what were they?
Yeah, I mean, you always, as I said, we always try to do better, and I think that the one part, I think that we could and should have done better is the period, the 6 months before the release. I talked about it in my in my article, and it's true that on the one hand, you want to keep everything as a surprise for your players. I mean, you can say, okay, I will keep it a surprise for players because they will be very happy to discover it when the game is released. But on the other hand, as I told you, we had a lot of wish lists, and there were some players who who were expecting the game and who started to post on in the Steam forums, okay, where's the game now? We haven't heard about it in 3, 4, 5, 6 months. And yeah, I think that if we could have done it differently,